Ladies and gentlemen, it is our proud privilege to have the Nobel laureate, Mr. Mike Pence, with us. I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us, to be sitting next to you. We've heard incredible stories, on the TV, in the newspaper, about the various things that you have done. You've been consulting policymakers, you've been a voice of reason for such a diverse audience. Truly, we are thrilled to have you with us. Mike, you must have heard a lot of movers and shakers within the room. That begs a question of leadership, right? The country is going through a tremendous time. It's an ocean of opportunities for India. We've seen technology and innovation playing a huge role in taking us forward in a short span of time. India has adopted innovation in a big way. You've been someone who's advocated for innovation in processes a lot. You spoke on AI as well during your session. I would like to understand from you, what is it that you would like to tell the policymakers and the movers and shakers within the room, or whoever is listening to you, about leadership, about resilience, and about embracing innovation and technology.
Well, I think right at the moment, the performance in India has been just spectacular. I think the architecture of the digital economy and the digital financial system is world class, the best one in the world. It's a really good balance between regulation and public sector involvement and investment on the one hand, and private sector initiative. I'm hoping that the kind of architecture of this system becomes a model for other emerging economies, or in fact other economies in general, frankly. This is that world class. I don't have a whole lot to tell the leadership. I think what the rest of us ought to do is come and understand what's going on in India, learn lessons, and then apply them elsewhere. I mean, it really is extraordinary. When I realized how much progress had been made is when I saw an extended video of the use of the mobile internet and mobile payment system in the agricultural areas. Where people used to go stand in line in banks, don't even bother to go to the bank now. Payments to people in the poorer part of the economy, go straight into their accounts, not through, multiple layers trying to get there. And it's just, you can extend credit. This is something that's not unique to India. With enough data, you can make profitable and properly priced loans to entities that are essentially almost impossible to get to in the conventional channels and so on. So all of that's basically, the engine underlying, inclusive growth patterns, or at least one of the engines, and it's working. I mean, it's impressive. So now you have biometric identification system, the universal payments interface, the architecture, sort of a level playing field. The banks can come in and everybody, all the interconnects work.
Right.
You don't have anybody trying to monopolize it. The data gets moved around provided the individual, approves it. So that's we got that part right. The Indian policymakers and architects of this got it right. And then you had this explosive growth in the mobile internet associated with the geo-revolution, so probably doubled the number of people with access to the mobile internet. And then you have an incredible amount of entrepreneurial activity in the kind of digital space that's created by that. In the course of that revolution, you went from the highest data rates in the world practically to the lowest data rates. So,
Right.
I mean, so it looks like an awful lot of stuff's going right. And there's so much talent. So if you get the architecture right and unleash that talent, whether they're entrepreneurs or people doing research or whatever, you've got just a very dynamic situation.
Brilliant. I like the fact that you mentioned about talent and workforce. I'm curious to know what would be your advice to the policymakers to kind of promote education and effectively reduce the skill gap that we have currently in this dynamic scenario that we are in.
Well, it just takes resources. I mean, let me give you an example. It's not India, just for a second. I mean, we got a lot of talented people in Italy. right? The young creative people. Many of them are, want to work in science or biomedical science. Biomedical science has revolutionary opportunities associated with it. It's probably going to partially merge with the digital, kind of AI things, producing another spurt of, extraordinary development. So you got a bunch of young people, they want to be part of that revolution. Well, if you invest enough and they have labs here, they'll do it here.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, they'll go elsewhere. Okay?
Right.
It's that simple.
Right.
So India's at a point now where it can afford to invest heavily in this kind of thing. So at least at one level, I mean, really, we're talking about the top, the next generation of creative, leaders in various fields. You just have to invest. A very large number of people will want to stay in their own country.
Right.
But they love these disciplines that they're in, whether it's digital or the energy transition or biomedicals and life sciences. You got to invest enough to make it one of the great places to do that work.
Right.
And I think India's at the point, if you asked me this question 25 years ago, you'd probably have to pick and choose. But I think India's at a point where it can afford these investments and keep the talent here.
Right. Let me steer you to a different direction now.
Sure.
While innovation and technology are playing a greater role in taking the country forward, helping enterprises become much more efficient,
Yep.
It is also incredibly challenging time as well for people who are concerned with climate. And being sustainable is no longer a buzzword. It is actually now supposed to be in the DNA of organizations. What's your take on adapting or embracing sustainability, and what would be your message to the people who are listening to you, the leaders who are the movers and shakers?
So I don't think anybody's got the formula exactly right. It's in some ways the most complicated challenge that we have, right? Because you can't do it with the government alone. You can't do it with regulations and policies. You need engagement by everybody. You need engagement by people and households. You need the corporate sector to be engaged, etc. The progress that we've made in the last 20 years is, I don't think anybody thinks it's kind of irrelevant or off the agenda, right? 25 years ago, if you walked around and asked people, what do you think about climate change? They'd say, well, that doesn't have anything to do with me. That's just no longer true. You can't go to any place on the planet and get that kind of answer, at least not in large numbers. So that's really important, right? Because people are now, aware. They're kind of committed. Some of them are, pretty upset, that we're not making more progress than we are. After that, I think it's sorting out the roles of these various parts of the economy and society. So that, take the United States example, under the Trump administration, we dropped out, basically, of the Paris Agreement. We're now back in. Mm-hmm. We have an aversion to taxes, which means pricing something. So we're doing it with subsidies. I don't think that's fully the best way to do it. I think you need a combination of incentives on the one hand and, prices or taxes or whatever that, level the playing field with respect to fossil fuels, for example, and greener sources of energy. That's a better way to go. I think if you can't go down that road because the society or the policy or the system won't allow you to, then your second best is better than nothing. And then I think the rest of it is just sort of staying at it. I mean, the way I see it is we have the technology to solve about half the problem. Mm-hmm. An important part of it is actually getting it done with the technology you have. The rest, we need new technology, right? So you've got these two parts and we need to work on both of them at the same time. The other thing I would say is, this is, for more relevant for the low-income countries, they're getting just hammered by climate shocks. And they don't have the fiscal and financial resources to, at least not adequate ones, to buffer that shock. So I used to think that, most of these countries were, even though they'd gotten started late on the development process, that they were going to be okay. They'd find a way to do it. But now when you have pandemics and fragmentation and global supply chains and more difficult access, and big shocks coming at you from, climate wars, etc., pandemics, it's starting to look like a perfect storm. So I think that group of countries, this is well below where India is now. They need help. They definitely need help, or they could just get caught. With kind of no way out.
Basis my understanding of how these things work, I've seen that developing countries have recently invested in their infrastructure, in their factories, while the developed countries have already moved on from traditional ways of doing things to a more resilient, more efficient, more sustainable ways of doing things. With developing countries, I've seen that the infrastructure has recently been developed, recently been installed, and now there is a pressure on them to now leave all of that aside and then adopt to new technologies, make them more sustainable. That requires a lot of investment, that requires reimagination of how infrastructure and how things could be. So I think it's a very challenging time.
I mean, it's a really important point you raised. So, think of it this way. If we'd started on this 20 years ago, a lot of that infrastructure might have been built differently.
Yes.
Okay. This is a late start. I don't think the best way to think about it is sort of dump all that infrastructure. The best way to think about it is, well, that's too bad we built that, right? But looking forward, do we have the resources, the international agreements, and all of the other things and financing that go with building the next batch? Because there's a whole lot of, infrastructure.
And investment has already gone.
That's coming in the future. We're not even fully urbanized, right? In many parts of the world. So I think the forward-looking version of it, which is, can we make sure that we don't build long-lived assets, whether they're residential or business construction or anything else, that we're going to wish we hadn't built, 10 years from now. So, and it's too bad we built all that stuff. And there were voices who said 10, 20 years ago, let's not do this. But the good news is that, take solar, for example. If you go back 15 years and say, and you came to the Indian government and you said, well, I know you've got a lot of coal, but you really ought to build solar. Well, solar was really expensive then.
Right.
Well, it isn't now, right? The costs have gone down by a factor of 5 to 10. And India is an economy that can invest in a capital-intensive technology, and the costs of capital are not ridiculous. That's not true everywhere.
Yes.
But it's certainly true here, which means that at least a fraction of the large amounts of incremental electricity generating capacity, you could reasonably, without paying a huge economic penalty, do with solar. Now you need smart grids and a whole bunch of other things and storage capabilities, and you need this kind of backup capacity for peak load things and so on. So, it starts to look a little complicated, but nevertheless, what I'm trying to say is, in this and many other dimensions, we have options now because the costs are different that we didn't have then. So this may be a good time to put the foot on the accelerator and get going.
On that note, it's a proud privilege again to have you with us, and thank you for sharing your insights. We wish you all the luck, and let's hope for a better future.
I think we're well on the way. Although, I guess I have to say, when I look at the global economy now, it looks like it's a pretty turbulent place.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll do better in the next few years.
Perfect.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us.